The Buffalo Bills extended all-pro slot corner Taron Johnson. And what exactly did Brandon Beane pull off regarding the contracts of Dawson Knox, Von Miller, and Josh Allen? We're going to explore all of that today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, welcome. Very excited for the Buffalo Bills to have extended the contract of cornerback Taron Johnson. We're going to break that down here to start the conversation, and then later on, Greg Tompsett from Cover One is going to join the show, and we're going to break down exactly what Brandon Beane did with the contracts for Dawson Knox and Von Miller, which are very creative moves that I didn't expect. And so Greg's going to break that down for us, in addition to a very creative restructure with Josh Allen, including doing some stuff already for 2025. So Greg's going to make sense of all of that later on in this episode. But we are going to start with the big news out of One Bills Drive. Taron Johnson, all-pro slot corner, extended 3 years, $31 million. Taron Johnson is now the highest paid slot cornerback in the NFL, topping Indianapolis Colts slot corner Kenny Moore, who just recently signed a 3-year, $30 million contract. And so Taron Johnson tops him by $1 million over 3 years. And not only is this good news because Taron Johnson is awesome and he's extended and it made sense to do that, which we'll talk about a little bit more here in just a second, but this deal should save the Bills around $4 million in 2024 cap space. So you extend Taron Johnson and you get cap space right now. That is a win-win. And this is something we've talked about. If you've been listening this offseason, you know that Taron Johnson as an extension was something we had targeted as a means for the Bills to create cap space in addition to Deion Dawkins and Rasul Douglas. And so far, they've already extended Deion Dawkins, Taron Johnson as well, now extended, and they did a little bit of a restructure with Rasul Douglas to free up some cap space. So the Bills very much kind of aligning with some of those thoughts that I had for creating cap space and, you know, keeping around some of your best, most dependable players. And that's exactly what Taron Johnson is. So Taron Johnson's 27 years old. He turns 28 in July, an original draft pick by the Bills out of Weber State, developed into an outstanding slot corner. And what's fun is not only, I mean, it's obvious that Taron Johnson's a good football player, but he's got a couple of moments that are signature moments in the last 10 years of Bills football. One of them being the pick six against Baltimore in the playoffs against Lamar Jackson. That was an unbelievable play. That's one that you'll never forget. But also the game-clinching interception against Patrick Mahomes in the 2022 regular season game in Arrowhead, where, you know, Patrick Mahomes was having the opportunity to lead a game-winning drive, and Taron Johnson picks him off on like the second play and ices the game. So some of the biggest moments that we've seen, at least defensively, have come courtesy of Taron Johnson. And so this extension made a lot of sense because Taron was in the last year of his 3-year, $24 million contract, and his 2024 cap hit was scheduled to be $12.4 million. This should reduce that, and the Bills should be able to spread some of that money out into future years. And again, my projection there is about $4 million in cap savings. And it's pretty clear to me why Taron Johnson deserves this extension. He's a high-level performer. His impact is incredible, not only in terms of the plays that he makes, but structurally what he means to the Bills defense, who the Bills are pretty much a base nickel defense. They run kind of a 4-2-5, and that's made possible because of Taron Johnson. And the role that he fills is not only a man-to-man slot corner, not only as a big part of how they disguise coverage. They really did some creative things with him this year where he would start off in the slot. He'd spin back and be a one high safety or a split zone safety. Just some really fun stuff with how they disguise coverages through Taron. But he also basically plays linebacker, and he's a dog. I know he's not a big dude, and there's going to be some situations where, that's can be challenging for him, but he plays above his weight class. He's physical, and he competes to fit the run. And so just a foundational piece of this defense, a cornerstone piece of this defense. And one thing that I've said a few times already this offseason that I think really provides a sound case for measuring just how good Taron Johnson is. The dude was a second-team All-Pro this past year and had 0 interceptions. And you look at a guy like Deron Bland, who got all these accolades for picking off a bunch of passes when, snap to snap, he wasn't that good. Taron Johnson literally didn't intercept a single pass this past season, still recognized as an all-pro slot corner. He means a lot to this defense. He's a high-level performer. I also love that he's durable. He's missed 1 game since 2020. He's started 65 of the last 66 games for the Buffalo Bills. And he's going to be really important moving forward. You just said goodbye to Trey White. You just said goodbye to Jordan Poyer. And Micah Hyde, basically, you've said goodbye to him as well as an expired contract that I don't anticipate being back. So for all the conversations we had in the past about that group being together for so long, it no longer is. The one guy that's left is Taron Johnson. He's going to be a critical piece of this defense, not only for how he performs, but as kind of the leader, right? It's him and Milano as your longest tenured members of that defense. And so a critical stretch ahead for Taron Johnson, not only to continue performing like he has, but really be a leader and help kind of reset this secondary with him being that mainstay. It's different players now. It's Taylor Rapp and Christian Benford and Rasul Douglas, and we'll see what they do with the other safety position. They brought in Julian Blackman for a visit on Monday, and I'd love for the Bills to sign him. But I think his presence, his experience, his time on task, he's going to have a really important role for this defense moving forward. So elated to see this happen, was hopeful it would happen, kind of thought it would happen. You feel like he's a core piece of what this team is. Still, he's 27 years old. It's going to be his age 28 season here. So he should be a nice piece of this defense for the foreseeable future now that he's locked up through the 2027 season. All right, folks, we're going to get to Greg Tompsett. We're talking Dawson Knox, Von Miller, Josh Allen, and a little Stefon Diggs here on the other side of it. So be sure to stick with me. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy, is also what helps keep your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. I'm joined now by Greg Tompsett of Cover One, and we're pulling him in. He's on the West Coast on a trip. And I said, Greg, do you have a few minutes to talk to the people about what's going on with some of these Buffalo Bills contracts? And Greg said, well, I only have my AirPods. And so if you're willing to deal with that, we can have this conversation. And so if Greg doesn't sound like he normally would on a podcast, that's why. But he is giving us some of his time when he's on a trip. So thank you, Greg, and welcome.
Yeah, anything for Bills Mafia. When these things happen, you got to be flexible. And obviously something that many of us were very excited about, and a couple surprises of things that maybe we weren't expecting.
If I have questions, I'm sure that means a lot of people have questions, and I always ask my questions to Greg when it comes to contracts. So that's what we're going to do here today. I want to start with Dawson Knox. I'm just going to get out of the way. Can you explain this to us like we are 5 years old? Because it looks like Dawson made some concessions in exchange for some guaranteed money. It's very helpful for the Bills. What's going on here?
So obviously he was one that I had on my list as, hey, technically we could restructure it, but I already think he's, being polite at the high end of what his market would be.
Yeah.
But many people would view it as maybe more than what he would get on the market. So I didn't want to restructure it because I didn't want to prolong that option of, hey, if we need to move on, we need to maintain that flexibility. So I had that in my list of kind of break glass in case of emergency kind of restructures. So when this news came out, it was something that I was a little hesitant of, like, hey, what did they do here? But the key, and I think we're seeing this more and more in the marketplace, is when the announcement came out, they immediately used the word renegotiate. And renegotiate is a trigger word that people should view as that probably means a pay cut, not just base salary restructure. All the reporters use the word restructure when they send those out. So that's exactly what we saw here. It was a mix of both. So this was a situation where the team didn't have a ton of leverage. If they were to try to release Dawson Knox now, they actually would have cost them more than to just keep him on the roster. And they didn't even have a ton of flexibility next year. It would have cost them a lot to be able to release him to get a little bit of cap space. So what they did was Dawson Knox basically gave back about $2.7 million as a pay cut and traded in $5 million as a restructure. So the team got over $7 million in cap space. And what Dawson Knox got in return is he is now an absolute lock on this roster in 2024 and 2025. So he got the assurance that, hey, we're not going to try to move on this year or next year, but you give us a little bit back this year and next year. He gave back the same $2 million and change both this year and next year. So now from a cash standpoint, he's basically like you'd call it like a 3-year, $29 million player at about $9.8 million a year, which is still at the high end and probably more than I would love to see, but it's better than $14 million where it was before. And if he earns more than that, it's because he hit some incentives and it means he played well. And anytime, we said this with David Edwards, we saw this with Taylor Rapp, anytime a player has a safe base and then incentives to earn more money, I think every contract in sports should be built that way. So I'm always for it. If guys hit incentives and earn more money, it means they played well.
So Dawson Knox locks himself in for this year and next, gives the Bills some cap relief, but also he takes a hit. I think this is a win for the Bills. I mean, and I think some of this stuff is a little bit surprising. I watched your salary cap extravaganza, and every time I see like approach about a pay cut, I get a little bit nervous, especially at a contract with a guy like Dawson Knox, where some of these other ones that made kind of sense, there wasn't much guaranteed money left. You could tell them, hey, we can cut you. You can try to go get more than this on the open market. You're probably not. So just take this. Dawson Knox was tricky. So I'm really excited to see this materialize the way that it did. And thanks for making sense of it. What about Von Miller?
I would say a quick credit to Knox and his agent for having the foresight to see, hey, they don't have the leverage now, but if we don't do anything now, they have a lot of leverage, very similar to what we just saw with Poyer, White, Mitch Morris next spring. So credit to them looking ahead and getting ahead of that.
Von Miller, another is renegotiated. I want to be careful with my words here, Greg. I don't want to mess this up. Reworked. What happened here? I know that there's reduction incentives baked in, but strip it down for us, make it make sense for us casuals, and let us know what really happened.
So 100% the same thing. When this news came out, I was just as anxious as anything else, because there was an enormous potential benefit of restructure. If they just restructured his contract, they could have created like $14 million in cap space. And in a season where we were really tight up against it, although I didn't want to do that, I could see the temptation of getting that. But doing so would have meant absolutely marrying yourself to that deal this year and next year and making it painful in 2026 if they did that. So when this first came out, exact same trepidation. Hey, what did they get themselves into here? What is this? But again, that announcement came out with the word renegotiate. And you saw myself, people like Brad Spielberger over at PFF, Jason over at Over the Cap, everyone making the same comments of, hey, that looks like a pay cut. Hey, let's wait for some more details here. That sounds interesting. As it came out, it initially was reported, okay, there are incentives done here. He did give a healthy chunk of money back. He had a huge amount of salary coming up, fully guaranteed, $10.6 million. The team had no leverage whatsoever to push him for a release. It would have cost them, I think it was a $23 million cap hit, and it would have cost them like $32 million to release him, like $9 million more to release him than to keep him. They had no leverage. So when this came out, I'm not going to say out of the goodness of his heart, because that's not what this was. There's more to it than that. But he could have told the Bills to pound sand and like, hey, tough luck. I'm not moving a penny. And when it came out, a lot of people assumed, okay, last year, if you look on paper, he had 5 tackles and 0 sacks. So if we make the incentives 1 sack and 6 tackles, that's technically not likely to be earned because it's more than what he achieved last year. If you made it as 8 games played, that's more than what he achieved last year. You would have then set it up where it wouldn't count against the cap until he hit it. So a lot of people were a little skeptical of like, hey, did they just give him some super easy to hit incentives that he's going to get all this money back and he didn't really sacrifice anything, but it let him kick the can down the road and we're going to have to pay for it in 2025. So when the announcement came out and the actual incentives were, 6 sacks, 8 sacks, 10.5 sacks, and the ultimate one, he can actually earn more money than what he was scheduled to make in 2024. And he gets that if he gets 15 sacks and leads the Bills to the Super Bowl while playing more than 35% of the snaps in the AFC Championship game. Well, if Von Miller gets 15 sacks and leads us to the Super Bowl, I'll cut him a check myself.
Well,
if he earns all that money back, God bless him. So when this happened, he not only significantly bet on himself that he was going to bounce back with a big season, he genuinely put his money where his mouth is. If he has, say, 5.5 sacks, he basically just gave away $6 million in guaranteed money that he could have just kept his mouth shut and kept all of. A lot of people see the way that he talks, and he's very into that kind of manifesting positive energy, that kind of thing, and only speaking in very positive terms. So he's the kind of guy that I could see betting on himself. This was much more than I would have expected. And credit to Brandon Beane. He saved himself from his own temptations. He had a chance. They gave him a $7 million roster bonus that they could have prorated out as a signing bonus and saved another like $5.5 million on top of the $8.6 million they saved in cap space. They could have made it almost $14 million in cap savings, and he didn't do that. So he's kicked very little down the road in this. The only scenario where he kicked any material money into the future is if Von Miller comes out and has a 13 sack season, a 15 sack season. And if he does that, who cares? That means that I'm on board with his contract, and I'm happy to have him on the team again next year.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So the cap savings from Knox, you said, is around $7 million.
Yeah, 7 and change.
And Miller?
8.6. So the two of them together are almost $16 million in cap savings between the two of them. And those were two that I would not even listed as potential possibilities because I didn't think they would approach them because both in those scenarios, the player had more leverage than the team.
Brandon Beane doing some very creative things to create cap space, and he also did something very creative with the contract of Josh Allen. I'm going to ask Greg Tompsett about that and some Stefon Diggs items here in just a moment, so be sure to stick with us. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or the 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook because right now new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet win. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. All right, Greg, Josh Allen, we knew they were going to restructure the deal. And I think a lot of people's first reaction was, well, they could have restructured more and saved more cap space, but then they didn't. And then more information comes out, and they did something with 2025. It feels very creative. I don't personally understand it. You do. So tell us what's going on here.
So first, I want to give a huge credit to Jason Fitzgerald at overthecap.com. He wrote a very insightful Recap of it is very technical, so it's not always super easy to follow. I'll try to kind of recap it for folks. When this happened, this was one that obviously I and many others, I was not alone in this. The Josh Allen restructure was a must-have. They could not have functioned this year without restructuring Josh's contract. But there was a lot of debate of, hey, at some point in the near future, we're going to get to the year where we kind of need to take our medicine. We can't keep kicking it down the road just because we know Josh is going to be on this team long term and through the end of his career would be my projection. Doesn't mean you can just continually kick the can down the road every year, because each of those little bits add up and make it more difficult in the future. So I had said, I kind of thought next year was the year that we would see a Patrick Mahomes Chiefs like market, revaluation, where they kind of give him a rework deal. It's not necessarily tearing up the entire old deal, but giving him a recalibration up to the top of the market where he rightfully should be. In both Mahomes and Allen, there's no scenario where they should ever be the 9th, 10th, 11th highest paid quarterbacks in the league, which both of them were at stages here in the past little bit as new deals kept jumping past them, and as Tua Tagovailoa is about to do and be paid more than both of those quarterbacks. As those things come up, we thought, okay, it'll be next year. Well, what the Bills did was they basically assured us it's going to be in 2026, because when they redid his deal for this year in 2024, they also redid his deal in 2025. So this year it was right around $47 million was his cap hit. They could have knocked it all the way down to $24 million and done a $23 million restructure that saved them that much. Instead, they reduced it by about 17, which is still a big number and a significant help of what they needed, but they didn't necessarily restructure every single piece of it that they could have. I thought that was interesting. I thought it was more a bit of discipline, or a bit of just, hey, let's take a little bit of our medicine and not recapture all of the cap space we needed. Now that all the details have come out, what we found is it's because they did this year and next year. So next year, with the amount that we kicked into the future, would have put his cap hit at $60 million next year in 2025. Now it's already down at $43 million. So they reduced this year by 17. They reduced next year by 17. And now all of a sudden, we don't need to redo it again. And the 2026 number is already up at like 64 million. And they basically assured us that, hey, we're going to kind of tear it up at that point and redo it with a new deal, putting him back up where he should be as whatever the highest paid quarterback in the league is at that time. At that point, it's not crazy that we could be talking about $55 million a year, which is where guys like him and Mahomes should be. That's what that's going to need to be. But it buys us 2 years before we need to do there. They also gave themselves a little bit of flexibility. There's a $14 million base salary next year. It's fully guaranteed, because of course it is. It's Josh Allen. There's no reason to need to get out of it. But they could restructure that next year if they need a little bit of extra wiggle room beyond that number, and they could take his cap hit from $43 million down to about $32 million and create another $11 million in cap space. That, again, is my interpretation of this year, where they didn't leverage every single piece of it. Next year, it's going to be one of those things. If an opportunity presents itself that's just too great to pass up and we need an extra $11 million, that'll be how I describe Stefon Diggs this year, is the break glass in case of emergency. We don't want to mess with it, but you can if you really need to. I think that'll be Josh Allen next year. They'll try everything they can not to restructure that, but they left themselves that kind of, parachute just in case.
Greg, you are an absolute gift to Bills Mafia with your ability to work through this stuff, man, especially as this roster has gotten more expensive and we've entered territory that we really haven't as a fan base. To have you to break this stuff down for us is so helpful, and I'm very, very grateful. Do you want to sneak one more question?
Thank you.
One more question in here for you, Greg, on Stefon Diggs, because over the weekend, his 2024 salary became fully guaranteed. And I don't know, I can't go a day without some manufactured Stefon Diggs drama. And so maybe you can speak to us regarding how does this impact things and what's kind of the reality here contractually as it relates to Stefon Diggs in this situation with the Bills.
So obviously the biggest thing that people, I think, don't grasp is Stefon Diggs is one of the only exceptions where Brandon Beane has reached a contract extension 2 years ahead of time. Well, when he did that, it was 2 years ago. So in reality, his new extension, which was the 4 years, $96 million deal, is starting right now. It's just beginning. So when you hear, normally Cowboys fans are the most common ones, but all kinds of other people and lots of other well-meaning rumor mongering sites along the internet talking about, oh, hey, are they going to trade for Stefon Diggs? It's because they don't have a full grasp of the financial reality of his deal, and that trading him represents, a $31 million dead cap hit, and that's not something you can get out of. And people will then challenge me and say, yeah, but if you do a post June 1st trade, it says that we get $19 million in cap savings. It's, well, yeah, because you now kicked $22 million of that dead cap into 2025. And all you did, all the painful things we just went through on Black Wednesday, where we released a bunch of fan favorite names and painful decisions, you would just invite that again next year because you kicked it into the future. And trading him after June 1st means you could only get back 2025 draft picks, which means you're now sacrificing the 2024 season to get no savings, trading away our number one wide receiver. So it's one of those situations where anything is possible. I'm not going to say that there's absolutely no chance it could ever happen because crazy things happen. I would have told you that the Broncos releasing Russell Wilson is impossible because no one's going to eat $83 million in dead cap hit. Well, guess what? They just doubled the record of the most dead cap any team's ever done. So I'm not naive enough to say nothing is ever going to happen. I will be absolutely flabbergasted if we see anything involving Stefon Diggs. I think he's locked to this roster for 2 more years. There's nothing realistic, like short of them absolutely painfully removing him from this roster because of some other off the field issue. Because, for all the things that people read into with his tweets, with his interest in fashion, he doesn't get arrested. He's not out there brutalizing women. He's not out there doing the things that we see some of these other people do. Yeah. Does he like attention from some vague tweets here and there? Sure. But the man goes out there and gets 100 catches and 1,000 yards every single year. I'm good with that. I'm okay with that. I ignore the tweets. I know some people can't help it, but I just don't see this fervor of, oh, we need to move on from this guy. He's still the best offensive player on the team, not named Josh Allen.
Plain and simple. Greg, really appreciate it, my guy. I know that you squeezed us in kind of last minute in a weird situation, so thanks for doing it. You're always very accommodating, and I greatly appreciate that. Real quick, Cover One, what do you got going on? What do people need to know about with you and your content?
Yeah, having fun. Obviously, Aaron and I try to really pace ourselves in the offseason. We've been fully focused on free agency, reacting to all the signings, reacting to the moves, reacting to the releases. We're about to switch over into draft mode and into much of your territory here, getting ourselves caught up here. So check us out. Aaron and I will be with you every Wednesday night over at Cover One, Buffalo, having a good time. Check us out, and hopefully I'll be able to guess some more contracts. I've had a pretty decent run here for a little bit. Excited to see what else we can bring aboard.
He's Greg Tompsett of Cover One. You can follow him on X at Greg Tompsett. Phenomenal podcast with Aaron Quinn over there with Cover One. So don't miss any of their content, and don't miss anything going on here at Locked On Bills. As always, we kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. Look forward to catching up with you again real soon.